Alright guys, welcome back for another video on HAIKYU Fly High, and today I am going to do a team building guide for Shiratorizawa School. Now, Shiratorizawa School is going to be pretty much focused around Ushijima, and in fact, when you actually try to build a team around Ushijima, depending on how many dupes your Ushijima have, it's actually going to have a massive impact on how you actually want to build a team. And that's kind of why later down in the video, I am actually going to compare quite a few different characters for the same position and talk about their pros and cons, because some of the characters are going to be a better synergy with Ushijima when he's at 0 dupes, some will be a much better fit when he's at 2 dupes or even higher dupes. So that's kind of why when I create my any kind of like dupe recommendations with tier lists, etc., I always list out separately for any character which actually going to introduce a new team play, or no, sorry, a new play style mechanics, because it's going to affect your team building significantly, and that's kind of why it's very important to bear that in mind when you actually watch this video. Depending on how many dupes of Ushijima or how many dupes you are eventually planning to get your Ushijima, you then may have to adjust your team building slightly in order to accommodate for that as well. Okay. Now, obviously, before actually showing you the team, I'm just going to do a quick recap so you guys know exactly what are the additional passive skills they're going to unlock, and I will also talk about why it's going to be very much like a game-changing mechanic when you do actually unlock it, and that's going to be the case both for 2 dupes and also 6 dupes to some extent as well. Okay. So first of all, at 2 dupes, what you're going to do is that you will be able to reduce your ultimate cooldown from 8 net crossing to just 4 net crossing. And whenever a player on your side perform a critical play, you're going to reduce that cooldown by 1 extra net crossing. And that is on top of the fact that when yourself actually produce a critical play, you will be able to reduce the cooldown by 1 net crossing as well. Okay. Now, why is this so important? So first of all, a lot of people take a look at this and think immediately, okay, I know how to build a team around Ushijima. All I need to do is make sure my whole team have very high crit rate, very high awareness stats, and then whenever they perform a crit, I'll reduce the cooldown. I can then spam my ultimate back to back. Now, that's normally going to be what people's first reaction is, and that is true. However, we need to go a bit more specific into that, because in this game, there are actually 2 forms of critical hit. There is the critical hit, which is going to be for attacking. So when you do a quick spike, power spike, set will serve, and that's basically driven by awareness. And then you have the other critical rate, which is determined for your defensive actions, so receive, block, and save, and that's going to be determined by reflex. And a lot of people, their first reaction when they talk about crit rate, especially for the case of Ushijima, because Ushijima actually have ability which increases his own awareness. A lot of people just jump straight into the conclusion that when you want to actually make the use of this skill and when you actually want to spam Ushijima Ultima, you are trying to build your whole team with awareness. But that's actually not completely right. And in fact, out of awareness and reflex, the one you should actually be building your team on a lot more should be on the reflex stats, not awareness stat. And the reason for this, you just need to think about it simply. So, assuming, first of all, Ushijima has ways to increase his own awareness quite a lot, especially if you have his memory. So I'm going to assume you're always able to crit when you do this yourself. So if your net crossing is already reduced down to 4, and then you're able to reduce it by further 1 net crossing, what that basically means is that there's only going to be 3 net crossing remaining on your ultimate cooldown before you're able to use again. Now let's imagine I have done my ultimate. The ball would have went over to the opponent's side, so that's 1 net crossing. The opponent would have returned that, that's another net crossing. So now basically by the time your turn starts, your Ushijima still have 1 cooldown, 1 net crossing cooldown on your ultimate skill. So you're still not able to spam it. The only way you are then able to actually spam it back to back in the same rally is only if you are able to somehow get a critical hit before Ushijima actually choose the spike action. Now, what are going to be the actions that you'll be doing before your Ushijima can spike? Think about it, right? The opponent is going to return the ball back to you. What's going to happen? You're going to try to block. What is a block? It's a defensive action. So how do you determine the crit rate for block? It's going to be determined by reflex, no awareness. Let's assume your block didn't crit. What's going to be your next action? It's going to be a receive. Receive, once again, is a defensive action. Its critical rate is not driven by awareness, it's driven by reflex, okay? So both of those actions are going to be driven by reflex. What's going to be the next action? it's going to be a set. And you may think, okay, set, yeah, that's an offensive move. Therefore, if I have high awareness, I can actually make sure my set is a critical and I can still reduce my cooldown. Well, unfortunately, no, that is not the case, because in this game, you choose your spike action before the set is complete. And the reason for this is quite simple, right? If I'm already holding the ball and I need to set it to someone, I can't suddenly decide to change my mind and switch to somewhere else to spike, right? So whoever you are needing to spike have to be decided before your setter can even touch the ball, right? Because as soon as they touch the ball will be going to whoever the spiker is going to be. So that's kind of why your set is not actually going to be taken into consideration when you need to perform this cooldown reduction. So now if you think about that, if I actually build a whole team with very, very high awareness, yes, I can make sure I can trigger this -1 cooldown from Ushijima's own skill. However, that's not actually going to allow me to actually spam it back to back. What's actually going to allow me to spam my ultimate back to back is driven by the critical rate, but it's not going to be the awareness stat, it's actually going to be the reflex stats by your blocker and also whoever is going to be receiving the ball. And that's going to be a huge determination when I talk about team building later on. You want teammates not with high awareness stat. High awareness stat is still nice, right? You can boost Ushijima, etc. However, in order to make the best out of the skill 2, or sorry, skill resonance 2 or dupe 2 ability, reflex stats, teammates with high reflex stats is really the ones you want to be looking out for, okay? So that's going to be one thing. Now let's move on to what happens when your Ushijima is dupe 6, so skill resonance level 4. Now you're actually able to double your awareness stats, and also you can perform a critical hit. Now, once again, this is going to mean something else. If you're able to double your awareness stat, what normally that means is that normally through your potential, through your memory, etc., Ushijima can easily already build up to at least 50% awareness. So if you're actually able to double this, what normally it means is that even without the help of any other teammates to support you, you can pretty much guarantee Ushijima is able to crit every single time. And once again, this is going to have an impact when it comes to team building, because now it's going to be even less reliant on you actually having someone on the team to actually buff your whole team's awareness, because Ushijima doesn't even need that to guarantee crit. So once again, it's going to be very important that you bear those two things in mind, because it's going to impact the team you actually want to build. Okay, now let's talk about team building for Shiratorizawa team. And as you can see, I have already put 3 characters in the team, and it should be quite obvious as to the reason why. So character number 1, Ushijima, he's the main character on this team. He's the protagonist. You're building a team around him, all right? All Shiratorizawa team is going to be built around Ushijima. If you do not have Ushijima, then don't build a Shiratorizawa team. So that's kind of why he's going to be here. Then the next person is going to be Suki, and I'll kind of put him here because everyone have access to him as part of the day 7, and he is a very good mid blocker. And on top of that, he does have a synergy with Ushijima as well, because whenever he does his quick spike, then the next spiker afterwards, who is going to spike, is actually going to get increasing awareness. So once again, that's natural synergy with crit rate, which Ushijima is going to benefit from. So that's kind of why I put Suki here. And then the third one, once again, a very obvious choice is going to be Tender. Now, first of all, he's from Shiratorizawa, so he helps to move towards that school bond. He also have a player bond with Ushijima, so it's going to buff the stats for both of them, which is very nice. And then the other thing is that, remember what I said earlier, if you're Ushijima, it's at dupe 2, which, by the way, that's the sweet spot I do recommend vast majority of people to go after for Ushijima. If you do actually want to build a team around Ushijima, you should try to aim for that dupe 2 on Ushijima. So if you don't have him at dupe 2 right now, just save out for his rerun banner. He's the first character, so he should be the first character to have a rerun. So hopefully it won't be that long. And then try to get him to at least dupe 2 at that point, okay? And like I said earlier, if you actually have Ushijima at dupe 2, in order to actually make sure to reduce his cooldown, you want teammates with high reflex stats. And that is actually going to be one of Tendo's passive. One of his passive skill is actually increasing his own reflex stat. And that's kind of why they are going to be very, very good together. Already very good, even if your Ushijima is at 0 dupe because of the bond. However, even better when your Ushijima is at dupe 2, okay? Now let's talk about the 4 other remaining roles. I'm going to start off with one Wind Spiker role, and this role is going to be for a supporting character. And why do you want a supporting character here? The reason is, when you have Ushijima on the field, you normally want him to do as much attack as possible. Now, if you have him at dupe 2, he can actually spam his ultimate back to back, then obviously most of your other players don't even need to spike if you're able to actually increase of your crit rate, etc. So as a result, both of your win spiker can be supporting or defensive. However, even if your Ushijima is not actually a 2-dupe, he is still going to be your first choice when it comes to spiking, right? Because you are building a team around him. And then as a result, normally you only need to rotate your attacks amongst two other spikers in the team, because normally in one rally, 3 spikes was, yes, 6 net crossing, because you'll be spiking 3 times. So 6 net crossing normally can already decide the outcome of the match. And the cooldown for Ishijima is only 8 net crossing, and he can actually reduce that to 7 net crossing as well if you actually do a critical hit himself. So vast majority of the time, you only need to kind of rotate around 2 other spikers. And I already mentioned, Suki have that natural synergy with Ushijima, so you can actually use him as a quick spiker in the sense that even after his spike, you're still going to benefit the rest of the team. So that's kind of why it's also going to be a good choice. So that's kind of why if you have Suki as one of your other players for you to rotate around your attacks, and then you have another wind spiker who can also pick up the attack, then the other wind spiker doesn't actually need to do too much in this game, in this team, and therefore as a result, he can play a much more defensive or supportive role. And there's going to be one very good character which vast majority of players already have, and that's going to be Iwazu because he is actually able to passively boost the crit damage for your whole team. Now, crit damage obviously is going to help very much with Ushijima because he is actually going to be critting vast majority of the time. So as a result, even if you do not use Iwazuyumi for any attacks at all, he just sit there on the court, he's already going to help your team out a lot, and that's kind of why Iwazuyumi is normally going to be a solid choice here as well. Now, if we just take a quick pause here and think about a Shiratorizawa team. Now, in order for us to actually have that school bond, we actually need 4 players from the same school. And obviously, right now, we only have 2 players from Shiratorizawa. And that basically means we need to also get another 2 players out of the 3 remaining slots. However, a lot of time, your setter shouldn't really be part of your school bond. And the reason for this is that every now and then, you may actually be required to swap your setter out for a different setter speciality, depending on the opponent, depending on the stage. So because you will be changing this all the time, ideally, you actually want your school bond to be completed without using the setter position. And that's kind of why if we actually remove this slot, we then realize that both my Libra and also the second wind spiker here, both have to be from Shiratorizawa team. Now the Libra, there's only one option, it's going to be Yamagata, so obviously he's going to be part of our team. Now he is there first of all for the school bond, but also for the second reason, he actually have a very high natural reflex rate because of his passive skill. And as a result, as you remember what I said earlier, if you actually want your Ushijima at 2-dupe to actually reduce his cooldown, the most important stats on your whole team is the reflex stat. And that's kind of why Yamagata is here, not just good because of that school bond, but also because of the synergy with the 2-dupe Ushijima, okay? So that's why here. And now let's talk about the wind spiker. And there are actually 2 options for wind spiker. You either have Goshiki or you have Ohira. Now, if you have watched my video previously, you should have already known that I don't actually think very highly of Goshiki, and I have always said Ohira is the better wind spiker out of 2 for a Shiratorizawa team. And hopefully, by this point in the video, you should also know the reason why. So first of all, if you consider Ushijima at 2-dupe or higher, your Ushijima will be the one doing most of the spike because he can actually spam that back to back. So you don't actually need your other wind spiker to be offensive. He should actually be a more defensive character. And between Goshiki and Ohira, Ohira is 100% the much better one in terms of defensive capability. Goshiki is still very good, but only for attacking. But as you can see here, especially if you're Ushijima at 2-dupe or higher, you don't need someone else to score on your team. So that's kind of why Ohira is going to be the clear winner here. The other benefit, which is even going to shine even more when Ushijima is at 2-dupe, is that Ohira also have skills which increases reflex rate. And once again, high reflex rate so that you can get a critical receive or critical block can actually allow Ushijima to reduce the cooldown of his ultimate and actually do that back-to-back spam. So once again, Ohira is the clear winner over Goshiki when it comes to 2-dupe. There's just no competition here, okay? Now you may be thinking, what if my Ushijima is only at 0-dupe? Does that mean I should actually be picking a more offensive wind spiker, such as Goshiki over Ohira? No, not really. And the reason for this is actually down to the setter. Because when we actually talk about Shiratorizawa team, there's really only two setups that you will be considering. One is going to be UR version of Oikawa. One is going to be this SSR Shirabu, who is from Shiratorizawa. Now, Shirabu and Ushijima actually have a deployment bond, which is an attack. It can only be used one time in the match or in the set. However, it's an attack. And likewise, Oikawa has a deployment bond with Iwatsume, which is also an attack. So even in the case your Ushijima is at 0 dupe, and therefore you need at least two or three other attacking points on your team to kind of get past the match when your Ushijima is still in cooldown. First of all, you already have the quick attack from Suki, which, like I said earlier, have that synergy with Ushijima. Iwatsume, to be honest, his ultimate attack is also pretty decent. If you can get him to 6 tube, it's even better because they actually ignore the enemy block or reduce their block. So that's going to be even better. And then even if you don't actually want to use both of them and maybe they're already in cooldown, there's still that combo attack between either Oikawa or Iwatsume, or the combo attack between Shirabu and also Ushijima. So you still don't need the other wind spiker to do any offensive spikes on your team. So no matter how you look at it, no matter whether Ushijima is at 0 dupe or at 2 dupe, Ohira is going to be the better choice than Goshiki, okay? Now let's talk about possibly the most important question of today, which is going to be the setup. Do you want Shirabu or do you actually want Oikawa instead? Now, first of all, Oikawa being a UR character, he's going to have much better raw stats and also kit than Shirabu. So if we're going to compare a 0 dupe Oikawa to a 0 dupe Shirabu, Oikawa is obviously going to win. If we're going to compare a 6 dupe Oikawa versus a 6 dupe Shirabu, Oikawa is obviously going to win, okay? So there's no competition there. So if that's going to be your decision, it's going to be pretty obvious. You should definitely go for Oikawa. However, what actually can make an interesting comparison is actually going to be a 0 dupe Oikawa versus a 2 dupe Shirabu, because now there's actually going to be a slight difference in terms of what they are going to bring to the team, and depending on how many dupes is your Ushijima, there could actually going to be slight variation in terms of how you actually want to build the team, okay? So let's start off with Oikawa first. What is Oikawa able to offer? First of all, Oikawa is able to offer a flat 10% bare minimum in terms of awareness rate. If you're able to rate his skills up, it can be even higher. On top of that 10% awareness rate, he can also stack attack tempo, maximum 10 stack, and each one of them can give an additional 1%, okay? So even at base level, right, simply just unlocking his training kit, you can actually get up to 20% increase in awareness stat, which is massive. Now, he can also consume 6 stacks of attack tempo to make sure whoever he sets to next is actually able to guarantee a crit. Now, that is probably going to be less useful for Ushijima because Ushijima is always going to have his awareness stats pretty high. However, for other members of the team, that's going to be a massive game changer in order to actually guarantee that crit. So that's basically what Oikawa is able to bring, okay? Just a crit machine, completeness from awareness point of view. However, what makes it interesting in comparison is going to be for Shirabu. When you get him to 2 dupe, you have to have him at 2 dupe, okay? At 0 dupe, Shirabu hardly offers anything to the team, unfortunately. However, at 2 dupe, things are going to change. Because now he can actually get a maximum of 5% crit rate in terms of awareness to the team, but also 10% reflex rate to the whole team as well. Now, if I just compare crit rate in terms of offensive crit rate, so just comparing awareness, you can tell Shirabu is nothing compared to what Oikawa is able to offer. Oikawa can get up to 20% even if it's just a dupe 0, Shirabu only maximum 5%. However, reflex is where it's now actually going to be interesting, because if you remember what I said before, if your Ushijima is at 2 dupe or higher, you don't actually care so much about awareness because all of the action you're going to get between your two spikes is actually all going to be defensive one. You actually want to go for that critical block or critical receipt. And reflex can actually be the one which help that. Awareness doesn't actually matter much. Reflex is actually the crit rate that you really want to look for. So that's kind of why if your Ushijimas are 2 dupes or higher, Shirabu is actually going to allow you to guarantee that back-to-back ultimate a bit more. if you don't actually really care about back-to-back ultimate, because maybe potentially you're playing with another strong wind spiker, let's say if you have Bakuto to replace Iwazumi very soon after, then what's going to happen is that you don't need to have Ushijima to do all of his ultimate back-to-back, because now you have to have another spiker on your team who can share that burden. In which case, then that extra reflex rate from Shirabu is not going to be as important. And likewise, if your Ushijima is only at 0 dupe, he is not able to spam off his ultimate back-to-back, and then once again, reflex stat is not going to be so important in the team. And in that comparison, then having Oikawa able to provide that flat awareness rate much higher to your whole team, and also allow them to guarantee crit is all of a sudden going to be a lot more important, because Yujima can't take the burden of all of the spikes anymore. Your other wind spiker need to chip him, and therefore having that extra crit rate on them is going to be hugely beneficial to the team. So that's going to be the biggest differentiator between Oikawa and Shirabu. And to be honest, in order to decide which one you want to go for, it's not actually down to how good their kit is. It's actually going to be more down to how many dupes to Ushijima either currently, or how many dupes you want to get to Ushijima eventually in the future. I would say anything which is 2 dupe or higher, then Shirabu can potentially be very good, especially if you want your Ushijima to be solo carry. However, if your Ushijima, you kind of want him to just stay at 0 dupe, and then what you can do instead is actually just pick up a 0 dupe or Oikawa instead, because first of all, Oikawa is able to provide that crit rate for your whole team, which basically means he is also going to be very much useful outside of Shiratorizawa team. By the way, Shirabu outside of Shiratorizawa team is pretty much useless. So if you're getting Shirabu, okay, it would literally just be for this team I have listed here. For any other team, he won't be even able to compete with Oikawa at all, okay? So this is purely from Shiratorizawa's point of view. So if you actually want someone a bit more transferable, you can go for that 0 dupe Oikawa instead. But like I said, if your Ushijima is right at 2 dupe, or eventually you want your Ushijima to be at 2 dupe, then Shirabu can be actually a very good alternative instead for allowing your Ushijima to actually solo carry. Now, obviously, this is going to be the immediate near-term Shiratorizawa team. In future, eventually, if you do actually need to make some upgrades to this with other UR or SP character, the easiest upgrade is going to be the duo of Hoshiyumi and also Hiragami, and you simply just swap out your Suki and also Iwazumi. So swap out those two into Hoshiyumi and also Hiragami, and then what this allows you to do is you still have your core of the 4 members from Shiratorizawa,